Today we're doing colour. This is what I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm actually using a much smaller sketchbook, as you can see, mainly because of this camera, but also it's not going to be a large scale project, so I think this will work rather well as a small little explanation. It's going to be sort of half tutorial, half experience it yourself, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. So I actually pre-made some diagrams before this, so if I can just find them, here they are. So the things we're going to be covering today, or what I'd like to possibly cover in this video, are colour opposition. So different sides of the spectrum of colour, but they differ with lights and sort of paints and pencils. We've got shades and tones, so that's gradients, going from light to dark, but also different variations of a specific colour. And then we have complexion and complementary colours. So this is kind of mixing them on a canvas or adding shadows and highlights and how that all works essentially. What I've actually used for quite a while now is the very basic idea of having three sort of groups of colours, and these are going to be warm, neutral and cold. Now, to explain this a bit further, I've actually got some pens here that I got a bit of a while ago, and as you can see here, I've got a pink, an orange, yellow, a green, a blue and a purple. Now you may have already guessed what I mean by warm, neutral and cold, but we'll see in a minute. So first of all, we have the warm colours, and if you've guessed already, that does involve orange, yellow and the pink or red, or anything that's going to be sort of on this end of the colour spectrum. However, on the other side of things, we have something called the sort of cold colours, and these are going to be the blue and purple, which I have here. Now often there are other colours as well that go along with this, and then we actually have neutral in the middle. Now this is where things like green go, because they're a balance between both the cold and the warm based on the colour spectrum. Things like green will go in the middle in neutral because they don't really have a split side to go to. So anything around the middle of the colour spectrum will also fit into this, not just green, but it's mostly variations and shades of green anyway. Next we have the light though. So light is different because the primary colours for light are slightly different to what you would see here. The primary colours for things like paints and pencil and watercolour and things like that, they are red, blue and yellow, whereas for light it's red, green, blue. So for light, the colour spectrum is actually slightly different. Now instead of having primary colours such as red, blue and yellow, which is what a lot of pens, paints and pencil does, light, because it's not like a physical thing, it's, I don't know quite how to explain it, but it's different because of light refraction. It's all got to do with physics, which I took at GCSE, so I know my way roughly around it. It's not specifically these shades, but this is like the baseline of light primary colours. So, colour wheel. This is slightly different. If you just bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to sketch something up. But yes, as you can see, I've actually done a bit of work here with the colours and a bit of diagrams and things. These are all very basic, but I should be able to explain around them rather well. So where we left off, I was at the colour wheel. Now this is essentially, well, a wheel of colour. As you can see, every colour has its opposition, just like the other two representations, whereas this one is a bit more visually pleasing, I guess. So here we have red at the top, and red is the direct opposite of green. And a lot of people get confused because in movies and other media such as Star Wars or Transformers or things like that, the eyes of the villains and heroes are red and blue, not red and green. And obviously green is actually a neutral colour as well, which is why I think this kind of get mixed up. However, in Disney, green is often seen as a colour of evil, so they have taken it on board a bit. Then basically every colour on this wheel has its opposing colour, and these can be really useful in drawings, especially between two specific characters or two contrasting objects or creatures or characters. Next over we have shades and tones. Now this is sort of where we get into gradients and also fading from sort of light to dark. So with the gradients, I've split it up into all the different sort of colours in the rainbow. Richard of York gave battle in vain, which is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Then we have all of them, and then dark and light, which is black and white, and a bit of grey as well. So red actually fades in from brown all the way down to a sort of mid-red orange. And then you've got orange, which starts with that mid-red orange and goes into a much more very like fruity orange colour. Now with the yellow and the green, I've actually got two separate bits. These are sort of like bronze green and sort of more a gold colour, and they don't really mix well into the actual rest of the spectrum. Whereas because gradients are different to the overall spectrum, this would work in a lower down sort of darker section. If you join these two bits here and you kind of mix them into each other, they wouldn't really work stuck together. It would literally look like you'd stuck them together rather than a fade into it, which is what it's meant to look like. So it's hard to see here, but there is actually more of like a deeper yellow here. It's a bit darker, and then we've got a brighter yellow here. They fade into each other, and then with the green we've got more of a intersection. It's made a new colour, and this is where the gradients and the shading and toning comes in. If you mix two colours together, or two shades of one colour together, you make a new shade, or with different colours you make new colours, and depending, coming back to this, depending on what shade or tone of the colour that is, you will get darker and lighter variations. So as you can see here, we have a very light red and a very light green. Or over this way we have a very light orange and a very light blue. But with the, this is the sort of deeper yellow. With that darker sort of yellow you get a darker blue. So that's kind of how everything works. Darker tones, darker shades are mixed in, creates darker tones and darker shades. But yeah, coming back over to gradients, the blue starts off with a bit of turquoise, more sort of ocean-like, a bit maybe icy, and then we've got more of a sky blue, and again in the middle they mix to create a new colour. I've actually had to separate up the blues, so we've got the lights and the darks. These two don't really merge too well, just like the green and the yellow. And this is more like midnight blue and sort of navy. It's hard to see actually in real life, on camera you can see it rather well. This is darker, this is lighter, and again in the middle they've made that sort of connection into a new colour. And then we've got the indigo, which is sort of purpley colours, darker one, lighter one, and it gives this sort of galaxy effect when you mix them together, but also have them at opposite ends of the spectrum. So I definitely will want to use this at some point in the drawing if I'm doing a galaxy. That can be very useful, and it doesn't just have to be purple or indigo as well, it can be any of the colours that will work for things like that. Then you've got pink, and it actually fades into some peachy colours. Quite hard to see on camera again, but they are there. And then we have all of them. Now this is where I was expressing shades and tones, and essentially what I've done is I've started off really hard pressure on the paper with the pencils, and then as I've gone across up and down like this, I've essentially gotten lighter as I've gone across, fading into their lighter tones and shades, creating some pretty interesting colours. And then just below that we've got dark and light. Now obviously you can't see white on white paper, but if you do it on black paper it is much more effective. Basically we've got black here, and this can be done with pencil, it doesn't have to be coloured pencil. It basically just fades into a very sort of light grey, the lightest you can go. Now we've actually got a grey pencil here which fades actually into white, and obviously white is the background of the page so you don't see it, but again if I did this on black paper it would be much more visible. And finally we move on to complexion and complementary colours. So this is basically sort of colour mixing and what shades and tones will go best together, shadows and highlights, and also we've got one more at the bottom which I'll explain sort of at the end. Mixing, so primary colours, as I've explained before, the light ones are RGB or red, green, blue, and the primary colours for paint and pencil and pen, they are red, yellow and blue. I think there's another one, I think it's digital, which is magenta, yellow, cyan and key is black. So yes, and essentially you can make any colour mixing these three colours, and obviously once you've made a mix you can mix that with another mix and that will make another new colour, and that's essentially how you make skin tones and things as well. I do want to try and do a challenge at some point where I use just the primary colours to paint a piece, and maybe I'll use the primary colours for light to do something as well. I think that'd be a pretty interesting concept. Also challenge yourself with it. I'd also like to do colour matching, you know how they do like skin colour matching and other things as well. That'd be quite a cool thing to do maybe in this month, since the theme I'm currently going with is colour. It's also Pride Month, so happy Pride, be yourself and be proud of yourself. So going into shadows and highlights, I have a couple colours here. So we have a couple pinks, a couple greens, some yellows, and I actually have some sort of grey whites as well. These all come from a pack of sort of water-based markers, and they're all numbered on the top, as I mentioned before, with a letter and a number and name of the thing as well, to let you know what colour they are and kind of how bright they are on the spectrum, but also what sort of place they fit into. So I've actually got a couple shapes here, and as you can see I've actually drawn a sun up this way. Now I'm using this as a representation for my lights, and if you have a directional light it's actually a lot easier to draw your shadows and highlights. So when you're doing a drawing, decide your sort of directional light and then draw from that. So if I was doing a cube like this, I would do this in a pink colour. This cube, so obviously we've got a lighter colour which is vivid pink, and we have a darker colour which is sort of like a dark magenta, pale purple pink. And because this side is facing away from the light source, this side is going to be darker, and same with this bit. However, the top side, because the light's coming down, obviously it means that this will be a lighter surface. Now it does get more complicated the more angles you have on a character or a creature or an object, and you can probably see that when you look at Marvel Comics and other things like that. There is a lot of blocky shadow, most of the time which is black, but I prefer to use coloured shadows instead, unless it is a black and white piece. So we go ahead and do this just like that. So that's pretty much done. Now obviously with the yellow sun, if you were drawing it in more of like a realistic concept, then the yellow light would actually affect the pink, changing the colour of the pink object, but also sort of mixing into it or just overlaying on it. But this is just, again, very basic. So as you can see, you've got the very light colour on top, a darker shade, and actually a much darker shade than that on this side. It's hard to see on camera, but this side is actually darker than this side because it's the furthest away from the light source. So not all the darker shades will also be the same colour, and it does actually add a sense of 3D to it as well, so you don't really lose the shape and its edges. And I've done the same here. As you can see, this side is darker than this side because it's further away from the sun. This was more of just an experiment, didn't really go as planned, kind of messed up a bit. But actually, coming down to meaning and passion, so I think a good representation of this is DC's sort of emotional spectrum and lantern rings. So we have red for rage, orange for greed, yellow is for fear, green is for will, blue is for hope, indigo is, I don't know what indigo goes for. Violet, also known as the sapphire core, is for love. You also have ultraviolet, which is kind of like a hive mind. You have black, which is death, and white, which is life. And I think that is somewhat of a good representation of colour. But what I think often gets mixed up with red is rage. But I think red is also the colour of passion as well, because it can mean anger, it can mean passion. And I think that's why a lot of sort of love-related stuff is also decorated with red. And actually, people do say love and hate are two very sort of close emotions. So, yeah. Anyway, that has been a video. I really do hope you have enjoyed this really sort of basic dive into colour. I will actually be doing a part 2 and hopefully a part 3 as well when it comes to this, where I'll be explaining it a bit more detailed and maybe doing some actual art and some drawings just to put it into motion. I'll try do a bit of pencil, a bit of marker, and maybe even a bit of digital as well, and probably also some monochrome stuff, so black and whites. And I'll also try photography as well if I can, if I have the time. I also have exams this week, so that's a bit of pressure. But I really do hope you have enjoyed. Again, happy Pride Month. Be yourself, be who you are. Don't let anyone take that away from you. I'm hopefully going to go to my first ever Pride Parade this year, so that should be a lot of fun. But other than that...